So, presumption of innocence, that came from Muhammad as well, upon whom be peace. Now, especially from a European conception of the presumption of innocence. Now, King Louis IX, he went to the East and traveled to the East, and he met a monk who was versed in the Bible and the Quran and Islamic civilization. And he said, look, if you want justice, you need to adopt this civilization. And he quoted a prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. And this according to the chronicler of King Louis IX. Now what's really interesting is that this is not just Islamic propaganda, this is academic works. If you go to the Journal of the Middle Eastern Studies and you look at the works of Marcel Boissard, he wrote an essay called On the Probable Influence of Islam on the Presumption of Innocence. He also wrote one on international law as well, because some people argue that Islam affected international law, specifically the Geneva Convention, because it was Muhammad, upon whom be peace, said that in engaging warfare, you can't kill innocents, can't kill children, you can't harm trees, can't harm monks, only fight those that fight you. So there's the Geneva Convention. Do you see? You know, if you have any prisoners, you have to treat them properly. So this is the link. King Louis IX went back to Europe and he established the presumption of innocence from a European conception perspective. And interestingly, before this principle, do you know what you had to do to prove yourself innocent? You had to fight a duel. And if you won, you're innocent. And if you were burnt alive and you survived, you're innocent. So there you go. Muhammad affected the most important legal maxim that we adopt as a Western civilization. Then we go to the final point with regards to influencing the West. This is tolerance. We have many colors and shades in this room. You have Desi, Arab, I don't know, Malay, Chinese, white, black, Indian, whatever the case may be. And that's because we live in a tolerant, a relatively tolerant society. So, as the Canadians say, your friends, the mosaic society, okay? And that's really good, and that's really important, and we should live like that. Now, these principles were made, if you like, or influenced by John Locke. John Locke was the post-Enlightenment British thinker, and he basically wrote treatises on tolerance, and he wrote on civil governance. And interestingly, John Locke influenced the founding fathers of America. Do you know that? John Locke heavily influenced one of the founding fathers of America. And what happened is John Locke used to be influenced only by one man. He would write in his personal letters, I learn and get influenced by only one man. And this man was called Edward Pocock. Now Edward Pocock was the first Orientalist in Oxford University, and he taught Islamic studies. And he traveled to the East and was influenced by the political tradition of Islam that teaches to be tolerant, like the prophetic tradition that I mentioned earlier. And he influenced John Locke, and John Locke wrote treatises on tolerance, and he wrote on civil governance. And do you know how he describes government in civil governance? He describes it as a vicegerency. Can you translate vicegerency in Arabic?
Khilafah.
Khilafah. Khilafah is like the political structure of Islam, the caliphate, which doesn't exist today, of course. Whether you want to call it Saudi or Iran, they're not Islamic. The kingdom's oppressing people. Khalas, full stop, turn the page. Now, so, you see the direct link there. That even affected the founding fathers of America, and European conception of tolerance came from the East. I mean, look, this is fascinating. So if John Doe next door doesn't know who Muhammad is, upon him be peace, teach him, and teach people how this man affected their lives. Your iPhone, scientific progress and revolution, presumption of innocence, and the very fact that we can be tolerant with one another. This is the Islamic tradition. This is how the Islamic tradition, in a way, facilitated Western civilization. And you could see this from the major historians, on the historians of civilization. And they don't have Muslim names, so it's not propaganda. Read it for yourself, it's in academia. Mayor Rosa Menaco, Robert Bruffaut, Jay Walker, and many, many others that discuss and describe this type of reality. Now, so we've discussed how Islam influenced the West. Let me discuss how I think it would save the West. Not in a crusading fashion, but with principles. And I want to talk about economy. Now, we live in an absolutely disgraceful period of our lives. Very disgraceful period of our lives. The reason I'm calling it a disgraceful period of our lives is because we live under a particular economic model or system, where you want to call it neoliberalism, capitalism, secularism, whatever. Names are not important. Let's describe the reality. And the reality is that according to the UNDP report, you have 20 million African children dying every year because they have no food. No food. But in America, you have about 10 million people dying because they have too much food. It's called obesity. Do you see? So the problem is not really food. It's a geopolitical myth coming from the neoliberals. Because what do they say? Oh, you know. By the way, when I mention liberal, I don't mean like Democrat liberal. It's more ideological, British. It's hard to distinguish. What I mean is basically that rugged individualism, okay? So, this is a fake geopolitical myth that there's too many needs or enough resources, because the Food Agriculture Organization has done a study, and there's enough calories on this planet to feed 3 planets. So the issue is not one of excessive competition, it's actually one of distribution. And if you keep on doing your research, you see 2 billion people living under $2 a day. You have 1 billion people with no sanitation. And you even have in this country 25% of people living under the poverty ladder. You have food stamps. You know, there was a documentary the other day on TV, and it was an American kid saying, the reason I don't want to miss school is because my only meal is at school. I've been to Africa, Burundi, South Africa. My friend went to Burundi, and in the villages, women don't have any clothes. You have to knock on the door and they have to hide behind the wall, so that they can't afford clothes. But they at least have 2 meals. 2 meals. You have kids in this country that have 1 meal. Do you see the problem here? There's a big problem here. America has turned into Africa in a way. And I think it's because of unjust economic policies. And because fundamentally the assumptions to understand economy are all flawed. Now, how does Islam solve the problem? I think Islamic economy is a very good alternative. There have been American scholars coming to England to teach people about this as well. And let me just give you some principles so you could think about. First and foremost, we have an accurate geopolitical model. The Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, he said in the prophetic tradition that could be found in the book of Tirmidhi, he said that the son of Adam, the human being, all he needs is food, shelter and clothing. So he defined the essential limited needs, which creates, from an Islamic economic perspective, a philosophy of distribution, not excessive competition. Okay? Also, in Islamic spiritual economic tradition, what we have is that the minerals and the natural resources belong to the people. So the government only has delegated authority to take that wealth and inject it back to the people. If Muslims knew this in Saudi and Bahrain and Qatar, there would be a revolution there, because all these elites stealing all the money. So, and this is as per a prophetic tradition. The Prophet Muhammad upon him be said, people are partners in 3 things: water, pastures and fire, meaning the natural resources. Also, we have the prohibition of interest, because it's considered an impediment to the distribution of wealth. Because if you remove interest, for example, you've got more money in the hands of society. And they can't hoard it, because hoarding is not allowed either. And if they save it, it's going to be, because there's no positive interest, it's getting reduced 2.5% each year because of the zakat system, the spiritual tax. 2.5% of the excess wealth goes to the poor. So it's going down. So that's an economic stimulus for you to take that money and inject it back into society to have private roads, businesses, hospitals, entrepreneurship, etc. Also, the money itself is not free floating like we have in America and Britain. It's actually contingent, it's pegged on something substantial like the gold or silver standard. And hence, when there's more money in society, it means there's more wealth. So business is not undervalued. We could talk about this until the cows come home, right? But it shows that there is a unique model, and it's a balance. It doesn't say just private property and just public property, because you're allowed to have your private wealth in Islam, and you're allowed to own things. You know, we don't say there's no ownership. Of course there is. But there's an amazing macroeconomical balance that I think is very focused on the distribution of wealth. Take even the zakat system, which is 2.5% of the excess wealth going to the poor. If everyone paid this, we would not have no poverty. And we've seen this in history. We've seen the Islamic Caliphate in history, that, for instance, everyone had food, shelter and clothing, because the administrators, when they had to take from the Bayt al-Mal, which means the the house of wealth, if you like, the government bank, if you like. They took the money and they had to give it to the poor. They traveled all across the state. And they came back with money. So it means everyone had food, shelter and clothing for the first time in history. Even if you go to the Ottoman mosques in Turkey, inside you see 2 dome structures, and they used to be filled with gold. So the poor person will wake up for morning prayers. If they don't have money for the day, they just take the gold coins. The historians say it was always full. Also, we have amazing statements. Take one of the caliphs, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. When I first heard this, I started crying. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz said the following. He said, "O people, go to the tops of mountains and put wheat there, so people don't say that we kept the birds hungry." The birds. That was the priority, not the people, because that was already there. Everyone had food, shelter and clothing. Because we have this philosophy of the distribution of wealth and the balance between public and private ownership and the essential macroeconomic tools to deal with these issues. This is why even when the Caliphate was the sick man of Europe, Abdul Hamid II, he sent money and resource stuff to the island, which many of you maybe come from an Irish immigrant background. Well, if you're from New York, I guess. But anyway, but the point is, there was a potato famine, and the British Queen, she couldn't do anything, and she was embarrassed. So that's the whole point of Islam, is it was there for the people. Allah says, God says in the Quran, أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ, we're here for the people, not مِنَ النَّاسِ, not from them, for them. And that doesn't mean we're arrogant, it means that we have an amazing model of self-humanity and make sure that 20 million kids don't die every 3 years, according to the UNDP report. That's the real weapon of mass destruction. That's the real terrorism. We're chasing a mirage as a society.